The morning my grandson called me from the driveway, voice low and cracked like he hadn't slept, I already knew something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you brush off before breakfast. The kind that sits in your chest and doesn't move. "Grandpa," he said, "I need you to come outside. Don't tell Grandma." I set down my coffee. I didn't ask why. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 63 years old. I spent 31 of those years building a small construction company in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I truly believed, that I knew the people inside my own home. I had a wife of 32 years, a daughter named Claire, a son-in-law named Richard who worked in commercial real estate and wore too much cologne, and a grandson named Theo, 24 years old, who had my father's eyes and more integrity than anyone else in this story. It was a Tuesday, in October. The kind of October morning that makes you think the world is still good, cool air. Leaves going copper and red, the kind of light that comes through the kitchen window just right. My wife had left early, she said, to help Claire with the florist. Their big anniversary party was 6 days away. 30 years of marriage, Claire and Richard. We had rented the entire back room of Harrington's, the nicest restaurant in the county. My wife had been planning it for 4 months. I pulled on my jacket and walked out to the driveway. Theo was sitting on the hood of his truck. He had dark circles under his eyes. He was holding his phone with both hands like it might try to escape. "I didn't know who else to call," he said. "Tell me." He turned the phone around and showed me a photograph. I am not going to describe what was in that photograph in detail. I will only say this. It was taken inside a hotel room. The hotel was the Marriott on Glenwood Avenue, 12 minutes from my house. And the two people in the photograph were my daughter's husband, Richard, and my wife of 32 years. I stood in the driveway for a long time without saying anything. The copper leaves moved in the oak tree by the fence. A neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. Somewhere down the street, a school bus made it stop. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 3 days, Theo said. "I've been trying to figure out what to do. I found it by accident, Grandpa. I want you to know that. I wasn't looking. Richard left his laptop open at the house last Sunday when I came to fix Mom's gutters, and a notification popped up. A folder. I shouldn't have clicked it, but I did. Does your mother know?" "No." "Does anyone else know?" "No, just me, and now you." I handed the phone back to him. I sat down on the porch step. The cold concrete came right through my jeans. Here is what I did not do. I did not storm back inside the house. I did not call my wife's cell phone. I did not get in my truck and drive to Richard's office and do something I could not take back. I've seen men do those things in 30 years of being around other men, and I have never once seen it end well. What I did instead was sit very still on that cold porch step and think about every single thing I thought I knew, and how much of it might be wrong. Theo sat beside me. He didn't push. That's the thing about Theo, he has always known when to be quiet. His father, my son-in-law, had never learned that skill, but Theo got it from somewhere honest. "There's more," Theo said finally. "That's why I waited 3 days. I needed to be sure before I brought it to you." I looked at him. The folder had more than one photo, and it had documents. He paused, working out how to say the next part. "Richard has been moving money, not from Mom's accounts, from his business, but the business attorney on the documents, she's listed as a personal contact on his phone under a different name, and she handles Claire's trust fund paperwork, the one your dad left her." I felt the cold from the concrete move up through my spine. My father had died 11 years ago. He left a modest but meaningful trust for Claire, his only granddaughter. It was managed through a small firm. Richard had inserted himself as co-administrator 8 years ago, right around the time Claire was pregnant with Theo's younger sister, and not paying close attention to paperwork. I had never liked that arrangement. My wife had told me I was being paranoid. "How much?" I asked. "I don't know the full amount yet, but the transfers go back 4 years. I closed my eyes. 32 years. I had eaten breakfast across from this woman 32 years worth of mornings. I had held her hand in 2 different hospital rooms. I had grieved with her when her mother passed and again when my father passed. I had believed, with the complete and uncomplicated confidence of a man who thought he was paying attention, that I understood who she was. "Okay," I said. "Here's what we're going to do. We are not going to say a single word to anyone. Not your mother. Not your aunt. Not your other grandmother. No one. Can you do that?" Theo nodded. "I need a few days. I need to know what we're actually dealing with before anyone starts swinging." "Agreed?" "Agreed. And Theo, I need you to send those photos and those documents to my email. Then delete them off your phone. I don't want anyone going through your phone and finding this before we're ready." He did it right there in the driveway. I went back inside and poured my cold coffee down the drain and made a fresh pot and sat at the kitchen table and stared out the window at the oak tree while the coffee brewed. My wife came home 2 hours later, carrying fabric samples for the table decorations. She kissed me on the cheek. She smelled like her usual perfume. She said the florist had the most beautiful ivory roses, and wouldn't they look perfect on the tables at Harrington's? I said they sounded lovely. She told me I seemed tired. I said I hadn't slept well. Every word out of my mouth was true. I had a college friend named Warren who had become a private investigator after spending 20 years as a fraud examiner for an insurance company in Charlotte. We had stayed in loose-touch Christmas cards, the occasional call when one of us passed through the other city. I drove to Charlotte the next morning, telling my wife I had a meeting with a subcontractor about a project in Durham. That part was a lie. I am not proud of it. But I have learned that sometimes you have to buy yourself a little time. Warren met me at a diner near his office. I showed him everything on my phone. He looked at the documents for a long time without speaking, asking me twice to zoom in on specific lines of text. "The trust fund transfers," he said slowly. "These are formatted like legitimate disbursements. Someone who knew what they were doing set these up. This wasn't Richard alone. The attorney's fingerprints are all over this structure. How much exposure are we talking about? That depends on how long and how often. But from what I can see here, the minimum you're looking at recovering if you move fast and smart is somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000, possibly more." I set my coffee cup down very carefully. "I need 3 things from you," I told him. "I need to know exactly what's been moved and where it went. I need documentation that will hold up if this goes to a judge. And I need to know how my wife fits into this, whether she knew." Warren looked at me across the table. He had been my friend for 40 years. He knew what that last question cost me to ask. "I'll find out," he said. I drove home to Raleigh, and I lived for the next 4 days inside a version of my own life that felt like wearing someone else's coat. I sat across from my wife at dinner. I watched television beside her in the evenings. I listened to her talk about ivory roses and seating arrangements for Claire and Richard's anniversary party, and I said the right things at the right intervals, and I did not break. I want you to understand how much that took. Not because I am a particularly hard man, but because I had loved this woman for more than half of my life. And some part of me even then, even knowing what I knew, was still hoping Warren would call and tell me I had misread everything. He called on a Friday afternoon while I was driving back from a job site. "She knew," he said. "I'm sorry, brother. She knew about the money. I can't prove yet whether the other things started before or after the money. But they've been in contact, your wife and Richard, privately, separately from your daughter, for at least 2 years. The hotel receipts I've pulled go back 18 months. I pulled my truck off the road into a church parking lot. I sat there for a while. A man was raking leaves on the far side of the lot, near the fellowship hall. Steady, unhurried work, back and forth. I watched him and breathed and tried to locate myself. Then I called Theo. "It's confirmed," I said. "All of it." Theo was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" "We protect your mother. That's the only thing that matters now. We protect Claire, and we recover what was taken from her. And we do it in a way she can survive. Okay? That means we don't blow this up in a parking lot. We don't make a scene at a restaurant. We do this clean." "Okay, Grandpa. I need 1 more week. I'm meeting with an attorney on Monday. A family law attorney and a financial recovery attorney, both. After those meetings, we move. I'll be here." The attorney's name was Susan Holt. She had an office on Six Forks Road and 22 years of experience in exactly this kind of case, the overlap between marital fraud and trust fund mismanagement. She was 61 years old, had short silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had the calm, focused energy of someone who had heard every version of this story and was no longer shocked by any of it. I laid out everything Warren had sent me. The photos, the transfer records, the communication logs, the hotel receipts. She read through all of it without interrupting me once. "The trust fund issue is actually the stronger case," she said when I finished. "The marital infidelity is relevant to the divorce proceedings, but the financial misconduct, the misappropriation of trust funds for which your daughter is the named beneficiary, that's where Richard and this attorney have real criminal exposure. If we move on that first, we freeze his ability to hide assets before he knows what's coming." "My wife," I said. "What's her exposure?" Susan looked at me steadily. "That depends on how directly she participated. From what you've shown me, she likely knew. Knowing and actively participating are different legal thresholds, but it affects the divorce settlement significantly. I don't want to destroy her, I said. I want this to be over. I want my daughter to have what's hers, and I want the truth out, and then I want everyone to be able to move forward. Susan nodded slowly. That's a reasonable goal. It will require your wife to cooperate in the financial recovery. If she does, her personal exposure can likely be managed. If she doesn't, it gets considerably harder for everyone. I drove home from that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in 10 days. Not relief exactly, more like the ground returning under my feet, like I had found the edges of the thing, and now I knew its actual size. There were still 2 days before Claire and Richard's anniversary party. I did not want this to come out at the party. The thought of it, the restaurant, the ivory roses, Claire in whatever dress she'd bought, their children sitting at the table made me feel sick. My daughter did not deserve to have the worst moment of her life staged at her own anniversary celebration. I called Theo that evening. I need you to do something for me. And it's going to feel wrong, but I promise you it's the right move. Tell me. I need you to get your mother out of town for the weekend. Not for suspicious reasons, find something natural. A drive to see her college friend in Asheville. An antique market she's been meaning to go to. Something she'd want to do. I need her away from this house and away from Richard for 48 hours while the attorneys do what they need to do. Theo thought for a moment. Mom's been talking about going to see Aunt Patricia in Boone. She keeps saying she hasn't had a weekend away in months. Perfect. Can you arrange that? I'll call Aunt Patricia tonight. Don't tell Patricia anything. I know. Claire left for Boone on Saturday morning, believing it was a spontaneous weekend trip her son had thoughtfully arranged. She hugged me in the driveway before she got in her car. She looked happy, a little tired. The way mothers of grown children always look, but happy. I watched her drive away, and I said a quiet prayer for her. What happened over those 48 hours I will not walk through in detail, because most of it was legal process rather than story. Susan's team moved on the trust fund accounts on Saturday morning, coordinating with the financial crimes unit that Warren had already briefed. Richard's co-administrator, the attorney, was formally notified of the investigation. Richard's access to Claire's trust was frozen pending full audit. My wife found out on Saturday afternoon. Not from me. From Richard, who called her in a panic. She came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table with Warren and a colleague of Susan's. She stood in the doorway for a long moment. How long have you known? She asked me. Long enough. She sat down at the table. Her face had gone the kind of pale that has nothing to do with color and everything to do with what a person looks like when they understand that the story they've been telling themselves is finished. I am not going to describe that conversation in detail either, because some of it is not mine to share. I will say that she did not deny the things she could not deny. I will say that at one point she cried, and that I did not comfort her, and that I do not feel guilty about that. And I will say that by the end of that conversation she had agreed to cooperate fully with the financial recovery effort in exchange for Susan's team working toward a settlement structure rather than criminal charges against her. Specifically, Richard did not handle it as gracefully. He drove to the house that evening uninvited, unanticipated, apparently under the impression that he could talk his way through this the way he had talked his way through most things in his life. He knocked on the front door. Warren answered it, which I think surprised him considerably. He did not stay long. Claire came home from Boone on Sunday afternoon. Theo was waiting at my house when she arrived. I had asked him to be there. I will not pretend this part was anything other than what it was. There is no clean way to tell your daughter that her husband of 30 years has been stealing from her inheritance and sleeping with your wife. There is no right order to say those words in. There is no tone of voice that softens it to a manageable size. What I can tell you is that Theo sat beside her the entire time, and that when she finally stopped crying, not because she was finished, but because her body had run out of what it needed to keep going, she reached over and put her hand on mine and said, "Did you protect me?" "Yes," I said. "The money? We're getting it back. Most of it, maybe all of it." "Susan is good." She nodded. She was quiet for a while. The evening light was going long and orange across the living room floor. "How long were you carrying this?" she asked me. "About 2 weeks." "By yourself?" Theo was with me. She looked at her son. Something moved across her face that I recognized, the particular expression of a mother realizing her child has become someone she can depend on. "I'm going to need a lot of time," she said finally. "You have it," I told her. "You have all the time you need." The anniversary party was canceled, of course. The ivory roses were sent to a women's shelter on the other side of town. I heard this from the florist later. She said the women there had been very pleased. I liked knowing that. It felt like the flowers had landed somewhere they were actually supposed to be. In the months that followed, the financial recovery proceeded largely as Susan had projected. The audit recovered $94,000 in misappropriated trust funds. Richard's license as a co-administrator was permanently revoked. The other attorney settled to avoid trial and surrendered her real estate license. Richard's own business, as it turned out, had several other irregularities that the investigation surfaced, and those are still making their way through the appropriate processes. My wife and I are divorced. That sentence still takes a moment to settle every time I think it. 32 years. But some things, once they are broken in the particular way that this was broken, cannot be rebuilt. I am not angry anymore. Anger is expensive, and I am 63, and I would like to spend what I have left on something better. Claire bought a small house on the other side of Raleigh. She has a dog now, a ridiculous, enormous golden retriever named Biscuit, who takes up most of her couch and appears to be genuinely helping. Theo comes to dinner every Sunday, and sometimes he brings his girlfriend, who makes a cornbread that I have requested 4 separate times. It's the best cornbread I have ever eaten. I have told her so. There are evenings when I sit on my porch and watch the oak tree, and think about how much of our lives we spend believing in a version of things that has more to do with what we need to be true than with what actually is. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because I think there is something useful in it. In learning to see what is actually in front of you instead of what you've decided should be there. My father used to say that a man's character is not what he does when things are easy. It's what he does when he finds out that everything he trusted was built on sand, and he still has to figure out where to stand. I think about that a lot. I think he was right. If there is one thing I would want anyone to take from this, anyone who has sat with something unbearable, carrying it alone while everyone around them went on eating breakfast and talking about flowers, it is this. You don't have to blow the whole thing up in one moment to tell the truth. You can be steady. You can be quiet. You can take the time you need to do it right, and you can still protect the people who deserve to be protected. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength there is. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. And from wherever you're watching tonight, thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.